My fiancé texted, I'll be working all weekend on a big deadline. Please don't disturb me. I replied, no problem. Good luck. Then her boss emailed, asking if she was all right since she'd taken the weekend off for a family funeral. When I sent him the live photos her friend had just tagged her in from a pool party, I wasn't sure what drove me to do it. Maybe closure, maybe a warning, or maybe it's just easier to tell strangers online about your most humiliating moment than to tell your friends. For context, I'm 32 and was engaged to Natalie, 30, for just over a year, together for 4. We met in grad school, moved in after graduation, got engaged last spring. Everything seemed normal. No obvious red flags, at least none I noticed. Natalie worked in marketing at a mid-sized tech company. Her boss, David, was about 45, married, and seemed like a decent, if intense, guy. I'd met him at company events, and he always acted professionally. Natalie sometimes complained about his micromanaging, but generally spoke well of him. We'd only corresponded once, when I helped plan a surprise birthday lunch for her at work, and she listed me as her emergency contact. I work in healthcare administration, so my schedule is predictable. Weekends often unless there's an emergency. Natalie's hours were less regular, sometimes working weekends for big campaigns or client visits. So when she texted on Friday that she'd be working all weekend on a major project and couldn't be disturbed, I didn't think twice. It had happened before. I replied, I understand. Good luck. Love you. And started planning a solo weekend, catching up on reading, watching a documentary series she hated, ordering Thai food she couldn't handle, just being a supportive partner. Saturday morning, I was enjoying coffee and finally reading that book when an email popped up. It was from David, Natalie's boss. Subject, concerned about Natalie. My heart raced. Had something happened? The email was polite, but confusing. David wrote that Natalie had requested the weekend off weeks ago for a family funeral out of state, but now he needed urgent changes to a campaign and couldn't reach her. He wanted to check with me before reaching out through other channels and offered condolences, saying she could take all the time she needed. But if she could call about the campaign, he'd appreciate it. I read the email 3 times. Family funeral? No one in either of our families had died. I'd know if someone in my family had passed, and if it were hers, she'd have told me. My confusion turned to suspicion. Why would Natalie tell her boss she was at a funeral, but tell me she was working? I called her cell, straight to voicemail. I texted, Hey, everything okay? Your boss just emailed me looking for you. No response. With growing unease, I checked Instagram. Natalie and I weren't obsessive about each other's social media, but we shared most of the same friends. I followed Tira, who'd organized Natalie's birthday last year, and her public Instagram was full of party photos. I didn't have to scroll far. Tira had posted several stories that morning, and there was Natalie, laughing, drink in hand, wearing a swimsuit I'd never seen, at a pool party. Location: Lake Havasu, Arizona. We live in Pittsburgh. The post spanned Friday night through Saturday morning, enough to establish a timeline that contradicted both stories. She wasn't working. She wasn't at a funeral. She was partying at Lake Havasu, over 2,000 miles away. I sat there, coffee cold, as the reality set in. My fiancé had lied to both me and her boss. The question was, why? I scrolled through more posts. Most were typical party shots, groups I didn't recognize, drinks, poolside poses. Then I saw it. Natalie with her arm around a tall, athletic guy, his hand on her waist, both grinning. The caption, the crew for the weekend, life, no responsibilities. He was tagged as Matt Davis LV, a personal trainer from Las Vegas. His profile was public, full of workout videos and motivational quotes. He'd been interacting with Natalie's social media for at least 2 months. Comments, likes on photos I'd never seen, shared to close friends, a list I wasn't on. I'm not proud of what I did next, but I was reeling. I took screenshots of everything, the email from David, Natalie's text, Tira's post, the photos with Matt. I debated whether sending her boss evidence of her personal activities was crossing a line. But she'd lied about a family death, which is a serious professional issue. I felt her employer deserved to know. I compiled everything into an email and, After hesitating for about 30 seconds, sent it to David with a brief note. David, thank you for your concern. As you can see from the attached screenshots, there is no family funeral. Natalie appears to be at Lake Havasu this weekend. I was told she was working. I'm as surprised as you are. I understand you have a business to run, so I thought you should know the truth. Regards, Mark. I turned off my phone, closed my laptop, and went for a long walk. When I returned 3 hours later, I had a flurry of missed calls and messages from Natalie, Tira, and even Matt, who must have got my number from Natalie. I didn't respond immediately, partly because I was too hurt and angry, and partly because I needed time to process. When I finally checked my email, David had replied, Mark, I genuinely appreciate you bringing this to my attention. Uncomfortable as it must have been, this puts me in a difficult position professionally, as I'm sure you understand. I'll address this with Natalie directly when she returns. On a personal note, I'm sorry you're going through this. My wife left me for her work friend 10 years ago, so I understand the shock and betrayal. Take care of yourself, David. I later learned David was at his son's soccer game when my email came through, and the situation concerned him enough to reply immediately, even on a Saturday. His note was unusually personal for a professional message, but I found out later he'd been advocating for better work-life balance at the company based on his own experience. His openness was part of his management style. That email, oddly, was what finally made me break down. The simple humanity of it, the acknowledgement that this wasn't just a work issue, but a personal devastation. I sat on my couch and cried for the first time since my dad died. When I checked my phone, there were 27 missed calls and over 40 texts. Natalie's messages started with, "Why did you email my boss?" and escalated to, "You've ruined my career," and finally, "Please just talk to me." I can explain everything. From Kira, initially hostile, "Why are you stalking my Insta?" and sending to Nat's boss. Psycho much. Then backpedaling. "Look, I didn't know she told you she was working. That's between you guys." From Matt, a single message, "Hey man, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Natalie said you guys were on a break." On a break? That was news to me. The classic sitcom line. I almost laughed. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I texted my brother and asked if I could crash at his place for a few days. I needed space to think and didn't want to be home when Natalie returned. My brother, being the solid guy he is, immediately said yes. I packed a bag, made sure our cat had enough food and water, and headed over. The full story emerged over the next week, pieced together from confrontations, confessions, and mutual friends. Natalie had been unhappy for months, but didn't know how to tell me. Translation: she wanted to explore other options while keeping me as a backup. She'd met Matt during a bachelorette weekend in Vegas 3 months ago, and they'd stayed in touch. This wasn't their first weekend together, just the first time they got caught. The lies were elaborate. She told me she was working, so I wouldn't expect contact. She told her boss there was a funeral, so the company wouldn't expect work. She created the perfect alibi, or so she thought, for a consequence-free weekend with Vegas Matt. What she hadn't counted on was David needing something urgent or Kira's need to document everything on social media. After 4 days at my brother's, we had a series of hard conversations about our relationship and living situation. Her initial fury about her job gave way to defensive blame shifting, then tearful apologies, and finally a cold admission that she wasn't ready for marriage. Each phase felt like peeling back another layer of deception. Over the next 10 days, we worked out logistics, contacted the landlord about the lease, and I started looking for a new place. The lease was in both our names with 8 months left, so we agreed she would stay and I'd keep paying my half until we found someone to take over. After consulting a lawyer friend, I insisted on a written agreement about the payments and a formal plan to remove my name from the lease within 60 days. I wasn't going to risk being legally responsible for an apartment I no longer lived in. 2 weeks after the discovery, I was moving my essentials to a temporary sublet while searching for something permanent. The engagement ring, which had belonged to my grandmother, was returned without argument. Fortunately, Pennsylvania law considers engagement rings conditional gifts contingent on marriage, so the return wasn't just moral but legal, sparing us at least one fight. In the months that followed, I learned a lot about myself and the relationship. Looking back, there had been signs, small inconsistencies, stories, weekend work emergencies that never produced results, a growing distance I blamed on pre-wedding stress. I rationalized them away. I trusted her because I wanted to. I filtered out the evidence that suggested I shouldn't. The truth is, I missed it because I wasn't looking for it. I trusted her completely. That perhaps was my only mistake. As for Natalie, she and Matt dated officially for about 3 months before he moved on. She moved to Chicago last winter for a fresh start. We haven't spoken since I moved out. What started as an awkward situation with David evolved naturally. About a month after everything happened, he reached out to see how I was doing. We met for coffee, initially just to clear the air, but found we had similar views on everything from healthcare policy to craft beer. The friendship developed organically, though we had an unspoken agreement not to discuss Natalie unless necessary. 3 months after everything, David sent me a job posting at his brother's consulting firm. I wasn't ready to leave my job then, but when a better position opened up 9 months later, he reached out again. I've gotten to know David beyond our awkward start, and we grab a beer occasionally and talk about everything except Natalie. Kira still gives me dirty looks when we run into each other, as if I'm the villain. I find it more amusing than aggravating now. It's been just over a year. The Lake Havasu incident happened in July 2022. I moved out in early August, and it's now September 2023. I'm doing better than I expected, dating again, cautiously, adopted a second cat, reconnected with old friends. The usual post-breakup growth. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal, though that hurt. It was realizing that someone I thought I knew, someone I planned to spend my life with, was capable of such elaborate deception. Not just a momentary lapse, but a sustained campaign of lies told to multiple people over multiple days. It makes you question your judgment, your perception, everything. If I could be so wrong about Natalie, what else am I wrong about? But time helps, and therapy, and friends who let you rant over beers, and eventually you start to trust again, not just others, but yourself. If there's a moral, it's this. Pay attention to the small inconsistencies. Trust your gut when something feels off. And if you're going to lie about your whereabouts, make sure your friends aren't tagging you in pool party photos. Edit. Since people keep asking, yes, I consider the possibility of a reasonable explanation before emailing her boss, but the combination of the funeral lie, the work lie, the photos with a guy she'd never mentioned, and her ignoring my texts painted a clear picture. Could I have waited to confront her? Sure. Would it have changed anything? No. Edit 2. The Henderson campaign in David's email was real. That wasn't a setup to catch her in a lie. David genuinely needed her input, which is why he reached out to me. Edit 3. Some question whether I should have contacted her boss. I get the criticism, but she used a fake family death as her excuse. In a professional context, that's not a small lie. It's manipulative and puts her boss in a terrible position. She weaponized compassion to avoid work while partying. I wrestled with whether contacting her boss crossed the line, but falsifying a family death for time off is serious misconduct. David had been misled about something significant, and he reached out to me first. Under those circumstances, I felt providing the facts was justified. Edit 4. For those asking about Matt's, we were on a break text. I later found out from a mutual friend that Natalie had told him we were having problems and taking space. This was news to me. We had normal ups and downs, but never discussed a break. Just another lie in a growing collection. Update 1 year later. Life has a funny way of working out. Remember David, Natalie's boss? He kept his word about that job at his brother's consulting firm. When a position opened up 6 months ago that matched my experience, he sent it my way. This time, I was ready for a change and applied. I got the job with a pay increase and better work-life balance. Ironically, I learned during the interview that Natalie had applied for a job at the same company a few months earlier and was rejected. Her reference check with David hadn't gone well. Actions and consequences. As for my personal life, I'm seeing someone new. It's early but promising. She's a pediatric occupational therapist who's refreshingly straightforward. When she says she's working, she's actually working. When she needs space, she says so. It's amazing how attractive honesty is after you've experienced the opposite. The two cats are thriving. The apartment is peaceful. I'm planning a trip to Europe next spring, something Natalie always postponed. Sometimes I think about sending David a gift basket to thank him for inadvertently saving me from marrying someone who could lie so easily, but that might be weird. A beer next time we meet will do. The lesson I've taken is that sometimes what feels like the worst day of your life is actually the first day of a better one. You just can't see it through the tears. Final thought. Trust is rebuilt one honest conversation at a time. It's been a long road back to believing what people tell me, but I'm getting there. And I'm much better now at recognizing the difference between genuine communication and convenient stories. Silver linings, I suppose.